You know that person who stays calm when everything is falling apart? The one who laughs at moments that would crush everyone else? That's not optimism. That's not ignorance. That's not luck. That's someone whose nervous system has already seen the worst case scenario and lived through it. When you've survived emotional earthquakes, everyday chaos stops feeling like a threat. It feels like background noise. And what looks like strength from the outside is actually adaptation on the inside. Because trauma doesn't just hurt you, it trains you. Let's dismantle a myth right now. When someone has been through too much, people assume something is wrong with them, that they're damaged, overly serious, emotionally numb, too calm when things go sideways. That assumption is comforting because it suggests you would be different if it happened to you. You wouldn't. Here's the truth. Their brain isn't broken. It's optimized for survival. And survival doesn't prioritize happiness, comfort, or emotional expression. It prioritizes prediction. The human brain is not designed to keep you fulfilled. It's designed to keep you alive. When someone grows up or lives through prolonged uncertainty, emotional volatility, neglect, or threat, the brain adapts exactly the way it's supposed to. The threat detection systems don't weaken, they sharpen. Neurologically, this means the amygdala becomes faster at recognizing potential danger. The prefrontal cortex learns to suppress impulsive reactions. The nervous system becomes efficient, economical, restrained. That's why these people don't panic easily. Not because they're fearless, but because panic stopped being useful a long time ago. Fear without action is wasted energy, and wasted energy can get you hurt. So the brain learns a new rule: observe first, react later, if at all. This is why they appear calm when others are emotional. This is why they analyze instead of exploding. This is why they seem detached during moments that overwhelm everyone else. They aren't emotionally disconnected. They're emotionally regulated under pressure. That regulation didn't come from meditation apps or self-help books. It came from experience where emotional reactions made situations worse. So the brain adapted. Another important detail: people like this don't live in the present the way others do. They live slightly ahead of it. Their mind constantly runs quiet simulations. If this goes wrong, what's my exit? If this person changes tone, what does that mean? If this situation escalates, what's my move? This isn't anxiety. This is anticipatory cognition. The brain learned that being unprepared has consequences, so it learned to stay prepared. That's why when something unexpected happens, they don't freeze, they pivot, they adjust, they adapt in real time. Because mentally, they've already been there. Most people experience stress as disruption. These people experience stress as familiar territory. And here's the part that makes others uncomfortable. They don't need reassurance the same way, because reassurance is a luxury you rely on when you believe someone will save you. They learned early that no one is coming. So their confidence doesn't come from optimism. It comes from self-reliance built under pressure. This is also why they don't overreact to small problems. When you face real instability, minor inconveniences don't register as threats. The brain has recalibrated its scale. Someone cuts them off in traffic, missed deadline, awkward conversation. Those don't activate survival circuits anymore. They've already seen what actual danger looks like. But here's the cost most people never see. When a brain is trained for survival, it doesn't automatically know when the war is over. The threat response becomes the default setting. So even in safe environments, the system stays alert. Calm is possible, but it's intentional, not automatic. This is why these individuals sometimes struggle to relax fully. Their body doesn't recognize safety as permanent. Safety feels temporary, conditional. The nervous system isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it learned to do: stay ready. This is the paradox of survival adaptation. What once protected them can later isolate them. People misinterpret their calm as emotional distance, their restraint as coldness, their silence as disengagement. In reality, it's discipline. Emotional discipline forged under circumstances where emotional expression wasn't safe, helpful, or rewarded. So no, they are not broken. They are proof that the human brain will reshape itself to endure almost anything. And once you understand that, you stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking the better question: what did they have to survive to become this controlled? Here's something most people misunderstand about empathy. They think it comes from kindness, from emotional openness, from being nice. That's not where real empathy comes from. Real empathy comes from threat exposure. People who've been through too much didn't learn empathy as a virtue. They learned it as a survival skill. When you grow up or live in unpredictable emotional environments, the brain learns one rule fast: read the room or pay the price. So the nervous system adapts. It becomes hyper-attuned to microsignals, changes in tone, breathing patterns, facial tension, pacing, silence, not consciously, automatically. This is called emotional attunement, and it doesn't come from compassion first. It comes from necessity. Before you can feel for others, you must first track them. That's why these individuals notice things others miss. The forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the delayed response before someone answers a simple question, the subtle FTE in posture. When a topic comes up, most people register content. They register congruence. Is what you're saying aligned with how your body is behaving? If it's not, their brain flags it immediately. This isn't intuition. It's pattern recognition trained by exposure. Their brain learned that emotions change before behavior does. So they learned to detect emotional shifts early, because early detection meant safety. That's why they seem psychic. They're not. They're observant in a way comfort never teaches. Another important distinction: their empathy isn't soft. It's accurate. They don't just feel with people. They understand why people behave the way they do, because they've lived inside similar emotional states: fear, shame, suppression, grief, emotional exhaustion. They recognize the internal posture of someone who is holding it together by force. That's why they can sit with uncomfortable emotions without rushing to fix them. They learned early that pain doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits. So instead of offering platitudes, they offer presence. And presence is uncomfortable for people who've never had to face themselves. This is also why their empathy can feel intense or even invasive to others. They notice when you say, "I'm fine," too quickly. They notice when your energy drops mid-sentence. They notice what you didn't say. And here's the uncomfortable truth: not everyone wants to be seen that clearly. Some people prefer polite distance. Survivors don't do distance well, not because they're needy, but because distance used to signal danger. Silence wasn't neutral in their past. It meant something was about to happen. So now silence has texture. Heavy silence feels different from tired silence. Avoidant silence feels different from thoughtful silence. They can tell. And this level of empathy comes with a cost. They absorb emotional states easily. They feel shifts in atmosphere in their body, tension in the chest, tightness in the jaw, shallow breathing, because their nervous system mirrors others automatically. This is why they often feel drained after social interactions, even positive ones. They're not introverted. They're processing more data than everyone else. Most people emotionally skim. They emotionally deep dive. Another misunderstood aspect: their empathy doesn't come from optimism about people. It comes from understanding pain well enough not to personalize it. When someone lashes out, withdraws, or behaves unpredictably, survivors are less likely to take it personally, not because they excuse behavior, but because they understand emotional causality. They know hurt people don't always look hurt. Sometimes they look sarcastic, detached, controlling, hypercompetent. So instead of reacting emotionally, they contextualize psychologically. This gives them an unusual emotional advantage. They can remain regulated around dysregulated people. But again, there's a trade-off. Being able to read everyone means constantly managing everyone. They often become the emotional stabilizers in groups without asking for the role. The listener, the check-in person, the one who notices when something is off. And because they learned early that their own emotions were secondary to survival, they often ignore their own emotional signals while attending to everyone else's. Empathy outward, suppression inward. This is why many of them struggle to receive the same care they give. They're fluent in emotional language, but hesitant to speak it on their own behalf. So no, their empathy isn't accidental. It's the byproduct of exposure, adaptation, and emotional literacy forged under pressure. They didn't become empathetic because the world was gentle. They became empathetic because the world required precision. And once your nervous system learns to read human behavior at that level, it doesn't unlearn it. You don't turn off radar. You just learn to live with it. Most people think trauma has only two outcomes. You either break or you recover. That's a comforting belief because it keeps things simple. But psychology doesn't work that way. There's a third outcome most people never see, post-traumatic growth. And it doesn't look like happiness. It looks like depth. When someone goes through prolonged hardship, their belief system collapses. The assumptions that once guided them, life is fair, people are predictable, safety is stable, all fail at NCE. That collapse is violent, but it also creates a vacuum. And the human brain cannot tolerate a vacuum for long, so it rebuilds, not the same structure, but a different one, a more accurate one. This is where growth begins. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun found that a significant percentage of people who experience severe trauma don't just return to baseline, they surpass it in specific domains, not because trauma is good, but because meaning becomes non-negotiable afterward. Survivors don't waste energy on illusions anymore. Their priorities sharpen. When you've seen how quickly things can disappear, you stop chasing status symbols and start valuing stability, honesty, and emotional safety. They don't want more experiences. They want better ones. This is why they develop an intense appreciation for ordinary moments, a quiet morning, a shared meal, a calm conversation, not because they're sentimental, but because their nervous system remembers chaos. Peace registers as precious when you know what its absence costs. Another major shift happens in relationships. Post-traumatic growth often deepens emotional bonds, not by making people more trusting, but by making them more selective. They don't connect easily, but when they do, it's deliberate. Surface-level interaction feels pointless after you've faced existential instability. So they look for depth, honesty, emotional consistency, accountability. They're not impressed by charm. They're impressed by regulation. Someone who can stay emotionally steady matters more than someone who can entertain. This is growth most people misunderstand. They call it seriousness. It's actually discernment. Another defining feature of post-traumatic growth is existential clarity. Survivors think differently about time. They understand viscerally that life is finite and unpredictable. So they stop postponing what matters. They speak sooner. They leave situations faster. They tolerate less disrespect, not because they're bitter, but because ambiguity stops feeling safe. Growth doesn't make them softer. It makes them decisive. But here's the part most motivational narratives leave out. Post-traumatic growth does not erase pain. It coexists with it. The nervous system still remembers. The body still reacts. Certain sounds, situations, or dynamics still activate old responses. Growth doesn't mean the wound disappears. It means the wound stops controlling the entire system. This is why survivors can be deeply appreciative and deeply guarded at the same time. They experience joy intensely, but remain aware of its fragility. They love, but without illusions. This creates a kind of emotional realism that can feel heavy to people who haven't been tested. Optimism without awareness feels naive to them, but awareness without hope feels pointless. So they learn to balance both. Another overlooked outcome of post-traumatic growth is increased PERS, ownal agency. When you survive something that once felt unsurvivable, your internal narrative changes permanently. You stop asking, "Can I handle this?" You start asking, "What's the smartest way through?" Confidence shifts from belief to evidence. They've already endured collapse, so future challenges feel less threatening, not easier, just manageable. This creates a quiet resilience that doesn't announce itself. They don't brag about strength. They don't romanticize struggle. They simply trust themselves more than they trust circumstances. And that's the real transformation. Post-traumatic growth doesn't make people happier in the traditional sense. It makes them anchored. They stop chasing emotional highs. They stop panicking over lows. They operate from a grounded understanding of reality. Life is unstable, people are complex, and meaning must be chosen intentionally. So no, trauma doesn't automatically make people stronger, but when growth happens, it doesn't look like triumph. It looks like clarity. And clarity is a form of power most people never develop because they never had to. Most people think danger ends when the threat is gone. That assumption only works if your nervous system learns safety before it learns survival. For people who been through too much, the war doesn't end when circumstances improve. It ends only when the body is convinced it's safe. And that takes far longer than most realize. This is hypervigilance, not paranoia. Not anxiety, not weakness. It's a trained nervous system operating exactly as designed. Hypervigilance develops when the brain learns one critical rule: danger can appear without warning. When unpredictability becomes normal, the nervous system adapts by staying alert, always. Neurologically, the sympathetic nervous system becomes dominant. Cortisol and adrenaline patterns shift. The body maintains a low-level readiness state even during calm moments. This is why survivors scan environments automatically. They notice exits. They track who enters the room. They position themselves strategically, facing doors, corners, or open space. They don't do this consciously. The body moves before the mind explains. This readiness isn't about fear of catastrophe. It's about intolerance for surprise. Surprise used to mean loss of control. Loss of control meant danger. So the nervous system removes surprise from the equation whenever possible. This is why they overprepare. Backup plans for simple events, contingencies for conversations, mental rehearsals for unlikely outcomes. To an untrained eye, this looks excessive. To a survival-trained nervous system, it's risk management. Here's the paradox. Hypervigilant individuals are often calm during real crises. Why? Because crisis matches their internal baseline. Their nervous system was built for instability, not predictability. So when things go wrong, they don't escalate, they stabilize. But when things are calm, T system has nothing to discharge its stored alertness into. So it stays tense. Peace feels unfamiliar. Silence feels loaded. Stillness feels unsafe. The body waits for impact that doesn't come. This is why relaxation can be uncomfortable for them. It requires letting go of control. And control was once the only thing standing between them and chaos. Another misunderstood feature of hypervigilance is selective control. Survivors often micromanage small details while remaining eerily calm about massive uncertainty. They'll stress over seating arrangements, schedules, or minor decisions while handling life-altering changes with composure. This isn't contradiction, it's strategy. They learned early that large events are often uncontrollable, but small variables, those are manageable. So the nervous system focuses on what it can control. Control becomes a stabilizer, not because it fixes everything, but because it creates predictability where possible. But hypervigilance has a cost. The body never fully rests. Sleep is lighter, muscles remain tight, attention rarely disengages completely. Over time, this constant activation creates fatigue, not from stress itself, but from never shutting it off. And here's where misunderstanding causes damage. People tell hypervigilant individuals to just relax. That advice is useless. Relaxation is not a choice when the body doesn't trust the environment. Safety must be experienced repeatedly before the nervous system recalibrates. Until then, vigilance remains the default. This also affects relationships. Hypervigilant individuals are sensitive to emotional shifts in others. Raised voices, sudden silence, mood changes, all trigger internal alarms. Not because they assume the worst, because historically emotional shifts preceded consequences, so their body reacts before their mind rationalizes. They may withdraw, prepare defenses, or emotionally distance, not to punish others, but to regain stability. Again, not dysfunction, adaptation. The danger of hypervigilance isn't that it exists, it's that it goes unrecognized. When people don't understand it, they mislabel it as control issues, mistrust, or rigidity. In reality, it's a nervous system that learns survival through awareness. Hypervigilance is the shadow side of resilience. It's the residue left behind after danger passes. And it doesn't disappear through logic or reassurance. It fades only when safety becomes consistent enough to feel boring. So if someone seems overly alert in calm situations, understand this. Their body learned a lesson you never had to, and it's still protecting them. Even when protection is no longer required, there's a type of grief most people never learn to name. It doesn't come from death. It doesn't come from separation. It doesn't come from loss. You can point to, It comes from adaptation. When someone survives prolonged hardship, something subtle but permanent happens. The person they were before no longer exists, not because they failed, because they evolved. And evolution always costs something. Psychologists call this identity disruption, but that term is too clean for what it actually feels like. What people experience is grief. Grief for a self that didn't get to finish forming. The version that trusted without scanning, the version that felt safe without proof, the version that didn't rehearse conversations or brace for emotional impact. That self didn't die dramatically. It faded quietly, replaced by a more functional model. And here's the unsettling part. Survival rewards the loss. The new self works better under pressure. It anticipates, it adapts, it endures. So the brain reinforces the change, which makes grieving the old self feel disloyal. This is why survivors rarely talk about this grief openly. How do you explain missing someone who technically still exists, but only in memory? How do you mourn a psychological state? This grief shows up indirectly as nostalgia that feels heavier than it should, as a sense of being older than your age, as discomfort around people who move through life lightly. It's not envy, it's recognition. They're seeing a version of themselves they didn't get to keep. This kind of grief doesn't announce itself. It sits under the surface, influencing behavior without words. It creates emotional restraint, not because survivors are cold, but because openness once came with consequences. The nervous system learned softness invites risk. So the self reorganized around durability. But durability has a shadow. Survivors often struggle to let themselves be seen as needing support. They minimize their experiences reflexively. It wasn't that bad. Others had it worse. I'm fine. This isn't false humility. It's a survival script that worked. Downplaying pain reduced attention, reduced conflict, reduced vulnerability. So even long after danger passes, the script keeps running. Admitting struggle feels like failure because the identity that kept them alive was built on self-sufficiency. Here's where it gets more complex. Identity grief doesn't just involve what was lost. It involves what was never allowed to develop. Playfulness, naivety, unfiltered joy, unconditional trust. Those traits require safety during formation. When safety is absent, development reroutes. The result is competence without ease, strength without lightness. This is why survivors often feel emotionally mismatched with others, too serious for casual spaces, too measured for spontaneous ones. They're not broken. They're unfinished in a specific direction, and they know it. That awareness creates a quiet sadness that doesn't incapacitate, but hums constantly in the background. And yet this grief doesn't make them weak. It makes them intentional. They value peace because they know its price. They value consistency because chaos taught them the cost. They choose people carefully because unsafe people taught them how much it hurts. They don't chase excitement. They chase environments where their nervous system doesn't have to work overtime. This is identity grief's final paradox. It hurts, but it also clarifies survivors become deeply selective about who or now. They build identities rooted in realism instead of fantasy. They don't ask, who do I want to be? They ask, who can I be without losing myself again? And that question reshapes everything: relationships, careers, boundaries, values. The grief never fully disappears, but it transforms. It becomes a quiet respect for the person they had to become. Not pride, respect, because they know the cost. Identity grief is the final tax of survival, and those who carry it aren't fragile. They are proof that the human psyche can adapt, endure, and still search for meaning, even after losing a version of itself along the way. They didn't just survive hardship, they outgrew the life that created it. And that's not loss. That's evolution with memory. People who've been through too much become walking contradictions, tough but tender, independent but lonely, hyper-aware yet emotionally generous, comfortable with uncertainty but controlling of small things. Psychology explains this clearly. They learned you can hold two opposing truths at once. Life can be brutal and beautiful. Strength can coexist with softness. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. They didn't just survive hardship. They extracted insight from it. These people don't shine because life was kind to them. They shine because they remember. the darkness. They laugh not because things didn't hurt, but because humor is rebellion against pain. They adapt because